So just before we start, the next event, it's on the 16th of April. I'll try and find the link that I had ready to go. The next event, I think it's Ricardo. Ricardo has agreed to do the next event, Ricardo Sosa. And yeah, that'll be an interesting one. He doesn't know quite what he's going to be talking about yet. I'm in discussion with him on that. But if anybody has seen Ricardo talk, you know, he does come up with some slightly different and interesting and sometimes quite challenging and provoking ideas. So I'm hoping that Ricardo might give us something interesting to think about and talk about at the next session. As I say, that's on the 16th of April. It's actually at a slightly different time. It's going to be at 10 o'clock, 10 a.m. GMT. If you follow the link in the chat box there, that'll take you to all of the Eventbrites. The event after that in May, hopefully, Nicole, I don't know if... I know we haven't quite confirmed it yet, or do you want to wait until?
Good. Also, most likely 10 a.m. That sounds to be a good time, and it's China, Design Futures in China. So yeah. Cool.
Yep. So that'll be another interesting one, a different perspective from a different sort of place in the world. So yeah, please keep an eye out for those events. I've just realised that you can also do sort of a whole bunch of other stuff in Eventbrite. So I'll try to maybe regularly communicate a bit more regularly about the events with everybody that's been at past events, if that's again okay with everybody. So the other thing that we'd like to do today is make a quick announcement, and if I can just do this. So it's something we've been, I guess, talking about as part of the DRS pedagogy SIG for quite a while. I'll just share my screen quickly. I won't go into... Oh, that's the wrong one. Great, well done. It's something we've been talking about for quite a while as the conveners, if you like, of Pedagogy SIG. So we've decided to make it official. We are officially going to be renaming from PedSIG to EdSIG. I feel as if you almost need like a party popper or some kind of announcement thing. I don't know how you do that online. Part of the reason for this was that we kind of wanted to reflect what we've been doing, I suppose, over the last year, which is try to connect a bit more with members. So this is the new strapline that we're kind of going with, and it's much more to do with supporting design education as a practice and as a knowledge practice as well, and particularly recognising, I think, what well, maybe a lot of us might reflect on or have recognised over the last year, that there are probably far more interesting practices that are taking place all over the world than perhaps we realised. And the connections that we've made over the last year have actually been quite powerful and quite good. And hopefully this sort of discussion series has reflected some of those as well. So we're still working on the text. We're still working on how it is we might kind of reframe Education SIG. But we did hope that the rename to Education SIG made it a bit more approachable, a bit more open, a bit more plural, and a bit more permeable as well. And that's the other thing that we're kind of interested in as well, is not allowing, that sounds a terrible, like elitist phrase, but hoping that there's more people involved in that sense. So if anybody's got any suggestions or feedback or comments on that, did any of the other conveners want to say anything on that? Okay, cool. As I say, the other way to look at it is that we've dropped a P and we've gone from PedSig to EdSig. I was going to do an animation round about that, but I thought that might be inappropriate. So there we go. That's the latest news from the DRS. But anyway, today's event, what we're really wanting to talk about. Sorry, was there anything else? Leave or? No? Okay. Oh, sorry, Liv. On you go.
No, I just like to say that I think this is a very nice change from PedSig to EdSig, and it reflects, as you said, what we have been working on for a long time. So I think it's very nice.
Cool, excellent. Okay, as I say, we're more than happy for any feedback, and anybody that wants to get more involved with the special interest group, that's absolutely fine as well. Just drop me a line, just let me know. So today's event, it's been kind of advertised as 1 year since, if you like, the start of the Distance Design Education blog. That was a website that we kind of set up partly in response, well, it was actually a tweet from a colleague in Singapore. I don't think Ping's with us today. No, he's not so far. asking how do we do distance design education at the Open University, because we've been doing it for quite a while. And it actually gave us a massive challenge. Sorry, it's a bit of absolute terrible self-promotion, but that's the link to the website there, just in case anybody hasn't seen it. It gave us actually a bit of a challenge, because in articulating, or how to articulate how we actually teach at a distance, we realised just how much tacit and embodied practice that we actually have. Even though it's at a distance, there's still a whole bunch of unspoken stuff, and it's actually quite hard to communicate all of that. And then second of all, we realised that we also had just as habitual a set of practices as you might find in a physical studio. You know, when you've been doing it for decades, you're going to build up a whole bunch of stuff that you don't even realise that you're doing, that you pass on as a culture as much as anything else. And then also you don't realise that all of that stuff is really hard to actually translate into different modes and settings where maybe you're not set up or predisposed to do it at a distance. You know, at the OU, we come with the a priori assumption that you're teaching at a distance, and that changes everything, particularly in design, as you can all, I'm sure, imagine. So it gave us a bit of a challenge, and the distance design education blog, part of the challenge was to articulate that, try to symbolize it, and I think even over the last year, doing that over the whole year, it has been difficult to keep doing that. I have learned probably more from colleagues trying to do things at a distance, and then realizing that that is something that we do, and then adding it to the list of things you need to remember to tell somebody to do the next time. I've probably learned more about distance education in this last year than my previous few years, just because I've had to make it visible, if that makes any kind of sense. So I don't know whether that's going to be a theme as we go through this. I know, personally speaking, that quite a few other things have become visible, and in discussions with colleagues, those little bits and pieces of knowledge, I don't know, the last couple of weeks I've probably come across 5 or 6 of those little bits, just little tiny observations that people have made, and the value of them, the importance of them, I don't think can be understated. We'll maybe come on to some of them a little bit later, but if we don't capture this knowledge in some way, or if we don't take it back into normal, there's been a couple of tweets today talking about what is going to be taken back into normal, and some deep concerns that institutions are just going to want to continue hybrid modes without actually understanding either of those modes or how they actually work. There's a real worry that we might take back a whole bunch of rubbish, if you like, into the normal situation. And even that is a question. Is there such a thing as a normal situation anymore? Is there any going back? So hopefully these are all kinds of things that we might talk about today. What we've done is we've tried to get a few sort of key individuals who are going to maybe just offer a few thoughts, a few observations along those lines of things that have happened or that they've maybe observed over the last year. At least I hope that's what I asked you to do. If not, it's fine if you do a tap dance or a song or whatever it is. I'm cool with that as well. So I'm just going to go around a few people. Feel free to chip in on the chat. I'll try to pick up on the chat if there's any discussion. And we'll try to get a bit of the discussion going. But that's what we're kind of looking for, those little nuggets of wisdom, or even just interesting observations from today. And then we can maybe have a bit of a longer discussion if we get to the end of this, round about that notion of what do we take from this? What might the next sort of horizon be? So if that's okay with everybody, or maybe Sucharita, did you want to have a go first? Would that be okay?
Okay.
Do you want to introduce yourself really quickly as well? Sorry, my apologies. Would that be okay as well?
Yes. I have a very unstable Zoom for some reason. Can you hear me?
Can indeed. Yep. Crack on.
Okay. Hi, I'm Sucharita. I teach in textile design at the National Institute of Design in India. And the discipline that I teach, as you know, textiles has a lot of materiality. It's a lot of hands-on learning, because my school also comes from an ethos of very teach through doing and learning by doing. I also teach in foundation program, and there also the courses that I take are very hands-on, and I teach things like color, or I teach field work. And this time everything had to go remote, and literally we had to like pick up the game as we went. for me, learning to teach online was the biggest learning in the last 1 year. And I remember when we started these initial conversations at the, even at the, between colleagues across the globe and in the virtual world, when we started meeting in the, even in the pedagogy special interest group, my greatest concern was why are we even concerned with how we like the old methods of teaching or what we are teaching, because maybe this is not what they need right now, and they need a lot of maybe the confusions and the ambiguity of what is going to happen next is what they need to be addressing towards. And I really like what some of my colleagues, and some of them are here, had started doing as checkpoints for working with the students. But for me, surprisingly, I found there's a lot that you can learn in the doing disciplines, like even in making weaving, or in teaching someone how to use color, how to paint, how to put two colors together and do the actual act of mixing colors together, or how to actually see in the field when I'm not there with you in the field, but you are in the field, was things that I managed to learn and to be able to do. So it was a really surprising learning for me in some ways, that there's a lot that you can still do which you never thought was possible, because you were never forced to. Now my institute has allowed certain students to come back for workshop access, and suddenly you fall back onto this old method of being there and demonstrating and showing it live. But for the courses that we had to do online, I ended up learning to record everything, record it multiple times so that they could see it in multiple directions, because there'll be someone. And recording had an advantage, because someone who was slower or who found it difficult to voice in the live class became more vocal and was able to revisit it many more times. So in some ways, the year of teaching hands-on things online has been a greater learning for me as a teacher, as knowing that it's not such a great impossibility. And if you can convince yourself, your students are more than willing to learn. So for them, they're there for the learning part of it. And if you can teach someone who doesn't know how to make cloth online, I think after that, to me, I think you can teach anything online. We all learned so many recipes online, right? The thing that you miss is your peer-to-peer feedback of the tacit like in a recipe. When I'm cooking, if I have the second person with me, they can taste or smell and tell me, listen, this has just gone a little off. The same is true of weaving. But it's not like you can't cook. You are your own parameter. You cook, you taste, you cook, you taste. You weave, you figure out, oh, you go back, you come back. So it's a different way of learning, but it is a great way of learning, is what I found out for myself and for my students.
Sorry, Sucharita, could I ask, did you find then that, or as you're going back, do you find that you're still doing some of the online stuff, perhaps to get students across maybe a sort of basic competence barrier? Maybe this is the basics of, these are the basics of weaving. And then when you're face-to-face, you can do that more detailed, that more nuanced tacit learning. Are you blending it in particular ways, or?
Now I'm blending it. So a lot of my assignments, which I would do like totally offline, say till last year, this year I am still keeping the component, even though my students are right here, I'm still making components and submitting it. Yeah.
Are you managing to cope with that? I mean, in terms of time, in terms of just logistics, is
I wish the day had longer, like 4 hours.
Oh, just 4 hours. Oh, okay. Wow.
It's really like it's like double, like twice.
Yep. I think, yeah, well, I don't know if anybody else wanted to jump in on that, but I think that's definitely something I've noticed other people reflecting on as well, that it's, yeah, it was one of the things that we did highlight way back right at the start, that you can't underestimate just how much effort is required to actually properly engage online. It's as much, if not more effort than the face-to-face setting. So again, if you're doing it for both settings, but you're not increasing the amount of time, yeah. Does that ring a bell with anybody else? Does that sound familiar? Cool. I mean, do you have any? Sorry, Naz, were you? Oh, okay. So cool. Sucharita, do you have any tips on that one? I mean, have you managed to find a way of balancing it at all, or is it
right
just
now,
what it is?
Very balanced because it's the student access to the workshops started 2 weeks back. Like it's happening that now I'm discovering there's certain things I tell while I am in the workshop with them. And because in the written instruction or in the online thing or in the video, I imagined or I thought I read, and then they question it and I discovered, oh, okay. So there is that gap and I'm not, I wouldn't, so it's double in the terms of time right now because you're doing it and then you're doing it again, and I've not yet found the balance. I don't know, someone else must have figured out the blended part much.
Yeah, that's what I'm hoping. I'm hoping that somebody's just about to put in the chat a link to exactly how you do all this and make it really easy. No takers. Maybe I wonder, is that something then that we should maybe
also our cohorts are quite big, so we have about 20, so then you have to break them into in the physical access. In the online, I can have 20 together, but in the because of social distancing, I'm having workshops of six, and then another.
I'm wondering whether maybe that, I mean, I know we kind of talked about this towards the end of last year, that kind of transition from moving from emergency teaching or responsive, very quick responsive teaching to actually having to then plan curricula, which was still kind of in a half emergency mode because you haven't quite bedded down any of the pedagogies. I wonder whether now we need to then rethink about how, or more strategically, how might we as a community start to build on those types of practices, those kind of blended practices, and properly support colleagues or help colleagues support themselves within institutions to get that kind of blend. I mean, I don't know, I've got no idea what the answer is. I say we come from a distance institution, so that doesn't maybe, we know how to scale up the distance bit, but how you get that lovely blend of using the best for each mode, that might be a non-trivial challenge. Maybe that's something we, those more sort of advanced concepts. Are we now into sort of advanced design teaching 101? I don't know. Did anybody else want to add any sort of thoughts to what Sucharita has just been talking about? Cool, okay. Sucharita, thank you very much. Oh yeah, John, go for it.
So I was just going to say about that, Sucharita mentioned the sort of, the learning is still there, but it's different, or the contact is still there, but it's different, or the engagement is still there. And it is that, like you say about the blend, it's sort of like I tend to think of it as an immersion. The type of immersion is different. And you guys have nailed it in terms of the distance immersion, how you get students immersed within a distant learning experience. And I think that for a lot of us, that's what we're still kind of toying with, so playing with that level of immersion and the difference of immersion. Yeah,
definitely, John. And the one thing that we don't teach at the OU is weaving, for exactly that reason, or pottery, or yeah. Interesting. Sorry.
I think, Derek, it would be good to look at for me, that's why I started looking at how ceramists work, how musicians worked in this time, how did people of disciplines where it's considered that the practice and the movement of the hands and the muscle memories and all the body posturing is as crucial as how your eyes are moving, how your hands are moving, how you're standing is as crucial as as say the theory of it. Like there's a particular knot that we use in weaving. And I realized there was no other way to teach it. I've sent them enough videos, there enough documented online. I mean, I don't even have to make a video. There are enough documented videos on that particular knot that's used in weaving. But I just couldn't learn it. And when they came here, the first thing they said was, can you demonstrate individually? So I had to like sit down with like three. And that's how they've always learned. That's how they've all the batches I remember teaching, that's how they were. So I don't know how much, like I would want to learn from disciplines like say music, ceramics. How are they managing?
I think maybe Sucharita, then what we could do, because again we haven't filled up all of the slots for the Futures series yet, and maybe one of the things we could do is really try to find like a deep embodied practice. I've got a couple of ideas maybe for that. You know, people who are so into like physical embodied practice, and I haven't spoken to them for a while. From Norway, believe it or not, obviously. But it might be quite good to maybe do a version on very embodied and tacit practice, if that'd be interesting. I know certainly I've come across a few examples of people doing some really, really weird and interesting things to kind of bridge that. But I also recognise the knot problem as well, Sucharita, from a past life on sort of like threading and like spindle weaving, believe it or not. But anyway, that's another story. Okay, Sucharita, thank you very much. I'll maybe just jump to you, James, if that's okay, because you mentioned that you recognise what Sucharita was talking about there, but maybe I wondered if you could maybe add to that, or maybe add your own sort of thoughts over the last sort of year.
Thanks, Derek. Thank you, Sucharita, as well. Derek, before I start, I just want to say thank you so much for what you set up a year ago. It was like a lifeline at that point, not just in sort of March and April, but what you kind of did subsequently, and what you and your colleagues did subsequently with that distance design education book, which was again vital and essential for us when we kind of moved into that sort of out of the emergency and trying to think much more strategically. So thank you. In terms of kind of just adding a few things into the mix, let me give you a bit of context actually in terms of where and where I teach from. So I'm in the UK. It's graphic design that I teach. This year I've been working with 100 final year graphic design students and we haven't been back into the studio. In fact, these students themselves have been online for almost half of their 3-year degree by the time they finish. So I think that's part of the context. And another realization that I had as I was thinking about this last night, I've been thinking a lot about studio. Some of my research is on studio and very much on physical space of the educational studio. So obviously this has been fascinating to be able to think about things in relation to that via online. What I realized last night as I was thinking about Derek's question was that there's a third actor in this, at least one other actor and maybe more, which is the pandemic itself. Which means that when I've been speaking to my students about their experiences of online learning, obviously the experience of it being online is a big thing for them, and that's part of it. But it's the experience of doing that in a lockdown mode adds a whole other thing to it. And I'm saying this really to remind myself that is part of what we're kind of sifting through, not just the difference between distance, online, physical, but also in this kind of exceptional scenario. Right, my 3 questions, in a way, really, these are 3 questions that I'd be happy just to leave hanging out there and let people come back to, or maybe just throw a few more things in to add some color to them. My first question really is, what could be a new story in relation to place? So I'm thinking a lot about place, and I guess what I mean by place, I'm thinking about that quite simplistically on one level, which is the studio, but then also the places which we have all been in. I realized our students, this is not disembodied learning they're going through, it's still embodied. It's just they're embodied in tiny bedrooms, kitchens, different kinds of situations. And I think that is part of this, that is part of their educational mix that we could do with sifting through and doing some thinking about, particularly when that comes back into play around, I think, identities and how, for want of a better way of putting it, designerly identities are formed. So what is the role of place? What has been the role of place in relation to that? And I think there's other ways to think about place. There's been some amazing positives that I think we all have experienced, which is being able to kind of bring people into the classroom spaces from all over the world instantaneously at all different times, and record it and have it there as a kind of Netflix kind of place to access as well. So place breaks down and reforms in different kinds of ways. That's my first question, observation. My second one is, what could be a new story in relation to power? So power is obviously being something that stalks the studio, stalks design education, or is part of that mix and is always part of that mix. Although the extent to which we think about it, you know, I don't know. My one observation I'm going to throw in is it's not uncommon, if you ever read anything on the studio, for someone to sort of cite Foucault's panopticon. And so the idea that someone is watching them all working and they internalize that surveillance and they kind of work under that. I kind of more recently came across kind of really interesting reworking of that, which is called the oligoptic vision, which is, rather than there being kind of someone at the center doing the watching, it's a mutual oversight. So everyone is watching everyone else, but whether that's kind of in an intimidating way or not, I'm not sure, but it kind of distributes that vision out, basically. And I'm not saying the studio in normal times, in physical times, is oligoptic. It's probably panoptic in places as well. But it's often felt to me maybe oligoptic is a better description of the physical studio. What I worry about in my experiences of online is it has felt a bit more panoptic again. I have an incredible reach. I can summon them, I can see what they're going to, and they can't really see each other. I mean, we can when we're in a Zoom room, but in a way, like, I've accidentally become the hub very much, I think, and I'm not entirely happy about that. I'm just recognizing that position as a tutor. And some of that is about how those online technologies work. And then I guess my final question is, what could be the new story in relation to communities? And again, that feels like that's been a really difficult thing, community and social learning that comes with that. We've not really found a way to make that work. And the students I've been speaking to recently have characterized their educational experience this year as much more formal, actually. So there's a kind of really interesting dichotomy, because we're all in our domestic spaces with the potential for informalities. And I feel in some ways that I know them better than I ever have done, but they talk very much still about formalities of how things are mediated. And I guess they're talking about all of that infrastructure of the studio, where they're with each other, they're walking to sessions and all of those things where those moments arise. I'm going to stop there, Derek, with those three small, tiny questions.
Yeah, I was going to say that's not an intermediate challenge at all, is it? Well, again, I'll maybe just open it out generally. Did anybody want to pick up on or recognise those questions, or second them, or maybe even respond in any way to any of them?
I've been negotiating that whole question of community in the way that I teach. And I think one question I've had to ask myself throughout the pandemic, so I teach social design. Well, I don't know if that's I teach design thinking for social impact. So I'm in this kind of social design, co-design space. And how do you teach this kind of work? Like you said, James, if you're not in a community with people. And so recreating the idea of community has been a big challenge for me, or part of my big experiment throughout the year. And actually recreating then different kinds of communities, because I've had to focus on the experience of the students as well, you know, and trying to force community among them, which is a kind of hard thing to do. But I've, you know, I recently came across a book called The Relationship is a Thing. And I haven't bought it yet, but I've been talking about it with people. But I've been thinking about that, you know, like, what is it that we're really teaching? And I've been thinking that, okay, one thing, because I'm in this space, one thing is about the relationships. And then the other thing is, like, to add to that sentence, I've said the thinking is the thing. So I am actually maybe less focused on outcomes. The outcomes still happen, but I'm asking myself as I plan each class, how does the class build a relationship and how does the class build a thinking? And so I can find really the essence of that. So even if we, in quotes, run out of time and we have 10 minutes, how can we do the things that build a relationship and build a thinking? So, it has come through like a lot of tiny groups. And none of this stuff is rocket science, I suppose. But, my students have been working on individual projects, but they're also working in tiny pods while they're working individually. And the pods are forced. That's the, what's the word that you use? That's the kind of oligarch or the panoptic, where I am still the theater person, controlling how these pods meet, but they've kind of expressed that they're not going to meet outside of class. So, in class, I'm creating these things. If I could draw on, what Sucharita was talking about, embodied practice, I found myself like really being very theatrical. I mean, and maybe other people have experiences as well, where I've moved into full-on entertainer mode, and I don't know if that's good or bad. But like yesterday's class, so we end up doing like these tiny warm-ups, and yesterday's class, my students came in with like a really low energy, and I said, no, we need to be theatrical, and because how do you get people out of this tiny box? And then when they started being theatrical in the warm-up, then they really did warm up. They had to talk about guests are coming, right? That's the scenario, because we have like a public crit on Tuesday. And we did this little warm up. Oh my goodness, the guests are coming. What do we have to clean up? And I would not accept an answer from them if they weren't theatrical. So it's like, I guess we can really borrow from these other disciplines. But, like these things have helped them connect. So, the relationship, yes, they're doing the design work, but we're really focusing on building relationships. And then I guess one new point that I'd like to bring in is, so like for me, the pandemic has been good because it's been able to silence the gatekeepers, right? So, there might have been people who wanted to talk about what is good design education, and but because everybody was in crisis, then it, and personally, other people might have felt this way, that, personally, they now have space, or they had to experiment because everyone was in crisis. And then the person who might have had the role of a gatekeeper saying, well, that's not a good class, or that, their voice was a little bit minimized throughout the pandemic. And then this global community, like this community in Distance Design Ed and Pluriversal Design SIG, all of these other communities have also kind of validated, some of the experiments that, in my case, that I've done over the last year. So I guess I'll pull back now and let somebody else speak. Lots of ideas, maybe, or maybe not.
Wow, yeah, definitely, absolutely. I mean, what was interesting, the commonality, it flips back. I'd love to come back to the gatekeeper thing, maybe hold on that one. But to take it back to the previous point, both you and James both talked about forcing community, almost like dictating what the community should be. That's an interesting scale of thought. I'm not so sure that we've really talked about, when we talk about it in terms of like the traditional setup, which is like Sean's imagination of, the one-to-one. So it's the expert versus the novice, but the expert constituting a community, i.e. the sets of behaviors and all the other little bits and pieces, not just the individual practices, but the community definition. That's an interesting one. I'm not sure. Is anybody right about that? That specifically? Because that's quite, yeah, that sent a bit of a shiver down my spine a little bit, because that's like another level of like authority or power, which you're probably not conscious of. Be interesting if that has become visible. Maybe that's too abstract. Sorry. I'll pull back down to the gatekeepers one then. Has anybody noticed that one or recognised that one? Ironically, I'll give you just a counter example to that, Lesley-Anne. We've probably actually gone back the way. We've probably gone the other way. And because we already did distance, we basically reinforced our existing structures and patterns, and it made it actually a lot harder to actually engage with other people. So whilst all the rest of the world was adopting Zoom and Teams and stuff like that, we were still left with certain other software that I won't mention. And, you know, we had to just get on with this, the kind of rubbish stuff, if you like, while everybody else was able to bypass the gatekeepers, try all these amazing things, and we're going. So yeah, there's definitely a bit of jealousy there, no doubt about it. Has anybody else managed to bypass a gatekeeper?
I mean, I don't want to speak too much, but I've got one point on this gate. I mean, obviously, I think as a tutor, I'm a gatekeeper, one of the central gatekeepers, and one of the central problems a lot of the time. What's been interesting for me is partly because we've been recording stuff as asynchronous stuff, which I think a lot of people have been doing, is I've become so much more relaxed about things being out of sequence, and being much more relaxed about realizing students will come at things in their own time in very, very different ways, which I think was a constant anxiety in normal times, because A, it wasn't recorded, and B, you kind of felt like you were curating this very specific journey. And I feel I have been liberated, or maybe I have been removed as a gatekeeper around the sequencing of knowledge, I guess.
James, could I ask, why is that? Why have you become more relaxed? I mean, first of all, what was your prior assumption to that? What was the need, if you like, for a sequence? And then why do you now think that maybe there isn't a need for a sequence?
Well, on one level, I carried these notions of adventedness, if you like, that we needed to be, again, linking back to community, we all needed to be doing this stuff at the same time. And while I still like bits about that, you know, that's just not a reality for lots of people. I think that the distance/online allows us to offer different models of engagement, and also to see, I think this is the final bit answer, I can see that people are engaging, so I can be reassured by looking at statistics that they've been engaging outside of those times. So, you know, if they weren't in the studio, I was just anxious because I read that as, you know, maybe very simplistically, but as non-engagement.
That's interesting. Yep, John, on you go, sorry.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because it chime that it's become more of a personal journey, like you say, because you're not in front of them. So their learning happens when their learning happens. And sometimes it's fast, sometimes it's slow, sometimes it takes longer to digest. And so weirdly, it's become more of a personal journey for them to go on. Maybe because we haven't got the legitimate peripheral participation of the studio at the moment. So it has to, by definition, become more of that, you know, some of the tortoise and some of the snail type of experience.
I wonder as well how much of that reflects, and this touches on assessment and a whole bunch of things, and I know this is really uncomfortable to say, and we're just as bad as any other institution in this, how much teaching is actually done for the comfort of the teacher rather than the benefit of the student. So things like needing to be there or having assessments in particular forms, a lot of it can actually be driven by your own implicit beliefs and also what you've got used to and what you've got comfortable with. And it can be difficult to shift out of a comfort situation, as we know, because we are teaching students to do exactly that. So yeah, which is
the sort of rules of the gatekeeper, isn't it?
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, that's, and it's the same with a lot of these other sort of issues. You auto gatekeeper yourself. It's like self-censorship or auto colonization. You do exactly the same. You internalize those exact same things, and you harm yourself in that process too. Yeah. Okay. I wanted to just maybe move it slightly. I'm conscious of the time, so my apologies if people wanted to slow down and talk about other stuff. I just wanted to pick up a couple of things in the chat. Isabel, I wondered if we maybe turn to you, because you've been having a bit of a discussion about the move back to physical space. Now, I don't know whether this was something you were going to talk about or wanted to talk about, but it is interesting, that notion of there's almost like a couple of different hybrid spaces here. It's like not just online and physical, those kind of like modes, if you like, of teaching, but when we go back face to face, it's not going back to where you were. It's not back at all. It's a different physical setting. I don't know if you wanted to, I think you've been having a bit of a chat around about the distancing issues and the physical issues.
Sure. Yeah, that's what I was gonna talk about, and thanks for inviting me here, Derek. Yeah, so I teach at Syracuse University in the U.S. And we've been in person the whole time. So I've been teaching in person for a year. And so distancing is a little bit different for us. We'll have distancing in the classroom, obviously. And I was thinking about Lesley-Anne's talk of theatricality. And that's definitely the case when we're teaching in person. And I have my mask on and I'm always smiling at the students or trying to have an expression when they're saying something and kind of communicate, okay, I understand, like I'm hearing you. And then I remember I have a mask on. So you have to be much more theatrical in your responses. And then also thinking about distancing like 6 feet. In the classrooms we're really spread out. So thinking like, how do we talk, have group discussions and that sort of thing. And the other aspect of teaching in person is just the fact that not everybody is in person, right? So people would be quarantined or abroad. A lot of our students our international students went home over the summer and weren't able to get back here. So we've been offering in-person classes, but also hybrid components where students can Zoom in. And mostly trying to do that at the same time. So managing an in-person classroom with students Zooming in from across the world at the same time and managing those different spaces has been an interesting challenge. But I think actually quite successful. Thinking about some of the other people who have been talking about how I don't think our education has suffered. I think that the students are learning. It's just different, but I think that we're communicating everything that we would have before, just in a slightly different way. That's my thought.
Does that hint at, is it the Mark Twain adage that despite education, I did still manage to learn things? Is it that students do learn despite teachers, or?
Oh, come on, we're working so hard. Hey, oh my God, like 2 or 3 times as much hours to plan these classes, Derek. Give us some credit.
Cool. Well, what sort of things then are you doing to plan out? I mean, have you really had to disrupt your practice to that sort of extent?
Oh, massively. So, like, for example, if students are in Beijing, and it's 13 or 12 hours different, and you're teaching a class in the afternoon our time, that would be 2 or 3 in the morning. So we've been teaching 2 classes for every class, right? So you'd have an in-person class and then you teach a second one, either very early in the morning or very late at night, right? So that's been something we've been doing. And then thinking about, so then how do you blend the groups together so that you don't have the separation of the students who are in person and the students who are online, right? And how do you create discussions? That's been something we've been doing. Massively investing in technology so that, we can have group discussions between the Zoom group and the in-person group at the same time. So I bought like webcams and microphones, and our department was so desperate at one point that we invested in a karaoke machine to amplify the voices of our students in class. Wow, so we have a gold karaoke machine.
That's pretty special. I've got a funny feeling that people would love that.
Yeah.
That's incredible. I mean, that sounds quite intense, Isabel, I have to be honest. Are you finding that, I mean, has it balanced at all in any way? Or are you finding that students are learning at different speeds or in different ways? Are there different inflections between these modes?
I think I sort of figured it out for one of the classes I'm teaching this semester. I think last semester was just kind of learning. I think I'm lucky. One of the classes I'm teaching is at 9:30 in the morning. And the students that are international are generally in Asia, specifically China, right? So they're all in the same different time zone with our students here. So that's just 10 p.m. So it's not so ridiculous. So we can have an in-person class that actually works reasonably well. And I think we kind of got it figured out. So our in-persons, we'll do breakout rooms all the time for discussions. Our students in person will join a breakout room on their computers, and we'll have these group discussions. We'll have to we have this horrible feedback that happens occasionally, but we'll mute it, and it actually works.
I have to say, I've been doing a kind of like a bit of a history of like virtual design studios for something else. It sounds like the early days of the second wave of virtual design studios where the technology was absolutely crap, but people knew that they wanted the kind of social engagement, but it just didn't hack it. So you're like sticking stuff together with sellotape in order to get to the human action or the value that you're trying to kind of pull that underneath. It's a bit crap that we haven't really advanced that far. Again, it's as Left Terrace, I think, says so often, that we are co-opting the tools, if you like, of business or of other domains into here, like Teams and all these other software sort of solutions. They're not necessarily designed for design or by designers. And even the tools that are designed for designers, it's like they've decided to get not designers in to design some of those things. It's a bit strange. Yeah, maybe we should actually spend a bit more time on that, maybe.
I just wanted to add, I think that this is what everyone else is going to be experiencing soon. When we start moving back, I've been doing it the whole time, but like once people who are teaching online start, like Sucharita's experience, once we start coming back into the classroom, I don't think all the students will be there at the same time. I think there will be continued people who are getting sick, and who are having to Zoom in, and you don't want a student who's sick potentially for a few weeks to have to miss class. So this is, I think, going to be the reality. I think this is the next thing that's going to be happening is exactly this. So I think we'll need to figure it out as a community. Get your own karaoke machines.
Yeah, it sounds like it. I, for one, would personally welcome that. I'll maybe pick up on that again, because that notion of theatricality or being a performer, that's definitely something I recognise, and how that was my sharpest shock, I think, when I started at the Open University, that you're speaking into the void. We don't require that our students have their cameras on, or even that they engage. So you're making up for everybody's interaction as if there is an audience there, and it can be emotionally exhausting. I think, just as Pam is saying, the emotional state, it can be really, really quite tiring. We might come back to the theatrical one, because it is an interesting one in terms of performativity. I just wanted to run back. Keneilwe, did you have your hand up at one point? My apologies if I missed it. And Sucharita, did you have your hand up, or were they? I think we've started calling them legacy hands in the UK. When you've forgotten to put your hand down.
Yeah, I was thinking about James' point, the point of that he mentioned that he feels so relaxed now that he's not in the I think it was James, right? Talking about feeling more relaxed. And I wondered whether that has got anything to do with the notion of space being about control. And now you have that realization that you don't have control over what happens. You don't have control of how students engage and so forth. And so you've accepted that, basically. Whereas if you're in studio, you're in control. It's about power and control, and you're the person who has all the power.
Yeah, and it reminds me of a really interesting piece of research done on studying young children playing with Lego and playing in Minecraft. And the difference between the physical and the virtual environments was quite stark. In the physical environment, it was about control. You have a finite number of pieces. You have a physical setting where larger children can, or smaller children with more fiery personalities, can push out of the way. It was all about power. It was all about that social thing. Whereas in the Minecraft setting, it was far more about the object that was being created, because you can physically be on top of one another in that environment. Again, it was an isolated experiment. Again, we do see those similar things happening, that the power dynamics or the relationships between the physical setting and the online setting, they do change. They definitely do change. People have different voices in these different spaces. And I am not for 1 second suggesting that one is better than the other. I think that different thing is important. So how we get that balance, I think I'm maybe going to come to maybe Colin in a second, because Colin has picked up on this too. That notion of space is really important, what are the spaces physically and what are the advantages of that? What should we look out for? What should we not want to take back into physical space? And what are the advantages of digital spaces? Or maybe even, I don't know, other spaces, other hybrid spaces, maybe different modes have different spaces. I don't think we've got that balance right at all. I don't think we know much about it, personally speaking. Colin, did you want to jump in on that one? Because again, this is probably going to repeat itself. Maybe we need to pick up on this at some future session, this balance between the physical and the digital. And again, I don't like dualities necessarily, but this is a legacy duality, perhaps, I don't know.
Yeah, no, thanks, Derek. I mean, I think that this is a duality that we're not going to be able to escape, because certainly there's been a lot of work that's done in the physical space, and you've done a lot of great work, among others, in the virtual space. But you know, the stuff that's coming out in the literature around high flex and hybrid, I don't think really speaks to the challenges that we have been managing in studio. And so, you know, I've been one of those cyborgs, sort of like Isabel, sort of, you know, in that physical space where you're in a mask, you're trying to emote, and the students can't see you emote, and they can't emote either, and they can't hear the people that are maybe online very well. And so, yeah, there are lots of just challenges, I think, around those tensions. And in particular, I know Derek and James and I have had some conversations around, you know, critique modes, and sort of thinking about how a lot of these online modalities have actually made the crit events more approachable, more accessible, more inclusive in ways that now I'm struggling to think about in the fall. You know, do I want to go back to the old way that I was doing crits, where students maybe didn't feel the same sense of emotional care and the same sense that they could fully participate? So I don't claim to have it all worked out, but it's certainly a set of tensions that I think we're going to need to live with and sort of manage as we think about what physical studio looks like going forward. Just sorry, Derek, no good answers, but like lots of things to think about.
No, that's cool. But even in that, I mean, there was a couple of observations there, Colin. I know it sounds very operational, but again, it's maybe an important operation. So in those virtual crit spaces, you mentioned that there's a different sense of care, but also I'm guessing that there's maybe, well, not that care's not operational, but there might be some other sort of things that are done that are different to the physical or the proximate setting. I wonder if you could talk quickly about both of those, because they're the kind of useful, sometimes they're the useful ways in to actually interrogating what's actually happening or our own practices.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if these are fully formed thoughts yet, so I'll see how it comes out. So for me, like the idea of care and emotional labor, the driver towards that has to be participation and the ability to participate. And so, you know, I run crits with 50 students in a room prior to COVID, and there's no way to do that equitably where everyone can fully participate, either physically or audibly. You know, there's just no way to make that really work well. And so as soon as you're in a space like Miro, where there's no cost to adding the additional sticky note and multiple people can hover around the same virtual board, that participation capacity just goes way, way up. And although you can track down who some of the people are that said certain things, the sense of anonymity or pseudo-anonymity in some of these senses, I think also does increase that capacity in ways that we just can't replicate in a physical setting. And so, you know, somebody posting a note and somebody not knowing, like, is this a first-year student or is this a fourth-year student posting this, I think allows people to express and sort of construct their identities and perform them in ways that I don't see working very well in the physical space. So yeah, I think the participation piece is really, really critical. And I'm trying to think about ways to pull some of that stuff back into the physical space. And then I forgot completely the second half of your question.
No, I think that's more than enough, actually, Colin, because, yeah, that's really, really, really interesting. I wonder whether that does relate back to what Keneilwe is also talking about in terms of space. That notion of participation and care, it does relate to space. And again, as architects, we tend not, or sometimes we talk about it, but we talk about it at a kind of second level removed. And even just in that, you've articulated that connection between what is valuable to humans in space and also the operationalization of that value, which is to do with connections. So Sorry, again, I've gone a bit abstract there. I can see the shape. Yeah.
No, I think the care labor piece is actually something that I want to pick up a little bit more. And I don't know, others might have thoughts about this. My husband does a lot of work from a care ethics perspective. And so we've had lots of conversations around care in studio because he teaches with me in the same program. And there's this very strong distinction in the care ethics literature between explicit and implicit forms of care.
Okay.
There are certain kinds of care labor that if they're recognized as care, they become inauthentic. And so, you know, like letting a kid like win at a game when they're little is something that if you make it explicit, then it loses all meaning. And so I'm sort of curious how some of that plays out in these digital physical tensions as well. And now he's listening to me from right over in the house because that's what happens during COVID. To sort of think about those notions of care labor and how they're actually very difficult to deconstruct and then like act against in physical studio because of all these expectations that people come in with like physically, but are actually much easier to deconstruct in these digital spaces. So I don't know.
That's interesting. Again, I'm a huge believer. I don't have that much evidence, got a couple of case study bits and pieces, that this duality that we create between virtual and physical, the thing that absolutely connects those two things is the way that you construct ideas and stuff in your head. And I think it's all these all these dimensions, if you like, of construction, such as connection, such as emotional labor, such as the relation or the presence, or all of these other, what shall we say? We just don't have good words for this. It's all the softer skills stuff, all of that other stuff we don't really formalize or talk about properly. I think that's the real stuff that matters. And that's the stuff that either gets valued or is recognized in terms of authenticity. And that's maybe the stuff that we need to work on, I don't know, mapping across. Sorry, I'm rambling again here. Did anybody want to jump in, or I know there's a few comments in the chat. My apologies if I'm not keeping up with the chat. And did anyone want to make a comment on Colin's observations there, particularly in the hybrid spaces?
Eric, I mean, it's slightly off topic because it was a little before to what I think after Isabel and I think Keneilwe was talking, and you also mentioned a lot of online teaching for the same batch that was online with me and has come here. A lot of discovery was that people who were much more, so this was a batch that I had not taught in the real world before. And I started with them first virtually. So it was a fresh batch. And so my discovery of them has happened through these stickers that they never put on, the cameras that never, in India, you can always say your internet is bad. And yes, it is. I just got kicked out of my institutional network. And I don't know why. It's a Friday, they want to do something. So the students never put on their cameras, and all you hear is the voice. A lot of them don't even speak. They'll just type something in the chat. All you see is the digital submissions. And so this was a batch I did not know in person first. And the strange thing happened when you come here, and there were some very vocal students on the digital platform and others who don't speak. The strange thing was when they actually came here, of course, they're broken down into smaller numbers because the 20 got broken into 8, some 7, some weird numbering like that. But when they came here, the ones who would be more comfortable speaking on the digital platform are actually people who are very quiet in the physical world. And people who were not opening their mouth in the digital world, who were always a sticker, are suddenly people I discover who are more comfortable in the physical world, who are asking questions, who are trying to interact. The second thing I realized was the sticker makes you look at everyone, me as a teacher, looking at everyone in a similar, I don't know, it just, you don't see the person. Everyone's face is the same size or almost the same way. And here you have a girl who's going to have physical difficulty weaving because she can't handle the loom. She's much shorter. Here you have a girl who's really tall and can handle a lot of physical strain of the loom. And something I didn't know because I'd not seen them. And here, then this batch comes and you discover, oh, I have to be different with her because she's going to be able to only weave this kind of yarn, and I'll have to be different with her because she can obviously take a lot more risks with her weaving, and she can try a lot more things. So those were things I discovered that the digital just changed for me in a lot of ways. The second thing I discovered, what Isabel is saying, this was the first time we could suddenly do a virtual exchange. So I'm trying to do a virtual exchange with, and I know it's existed for very long when technologies were very rudimentary also, but now I think we are more accepting of it. And of course, a lot of it is exchanging ideas through Miro, through Zoom. So some of my students who could never afford to go for an exchange, because exchanges means financial implications. And suddenly this whole world opened up for them. So these students who were bright, but financially cannot make the time, are actually working double hours. So they're staying up after their NID classes to be able to attend class elsewhere and be part of this virtual cohort. So there's some so there are lots of things embedded here. The physicality of how you become when you're in person, how you are in the digital, the fact that the digital allows you certain things which the physical could never have given some of these people. So it's a lot of things that's happening. I would like someone to talk a little more on the gatekeeping part, please. And someone said that you became more relaxed with this teaching. Can you talk a little more about that? Because for me, I think I became even more strained and less relaxed about the fact that, oh my God, how do I get this? So I want to know that part. Well, I want to know those two parts, please.
Cool, well, that'll be good. I think what I'll maybe do is, if anybody wanted to leave just now, I'm conscious of the fact that we're at the hour. So I'm going to keep recording and I'm going to keep the session going about, because I think there are quite a number of really good threads here. I'd also like to I'll try to sketch out a blog post trying to collect some of these themes, because I think there's some actually really, really important themes here. I'll run it past some of the main speakers before I do that, because I'm conscious of the fact that some of those ideas maybe people are wanting to still work on. So if anybody wanted to leave just now, thank you very much for coming, and yeah, etc. We'll make the recording available afterwards. But if anybody wanted to respond to Sucharita's sort of question there, I'd also quite like to pick up on Malcolm's point there. Malcolm, I liked your point about the theatricality. Again, it's something that, you know, yeah, well, you and I know about this, and it's almost a necessity at a distance. In some ways, you have to be that person that, and then you have to do that in such a way that you don't do it so much that everybody becomes a copy of you, but you're almost like just giving permission to students so that they can then assert their personalities. And it's a way of inviting people into an online space. It's like how you'd invite somebody into a physical space. My big feeling on this digital physical thing is that it's absolutely non-trivial. The same reasons why people are shy or don't speak in a physical space, it's not just the physical space or a physical space. I'll shut up when I go to like one of my faculty's functions or something like that, because I don't believe that I should be there. I don't believe that I am good enough to talk to some people. So I'll shut up. And in certain other social situations, you won't be able to get me to shut up, as you're finding out just now. So it's not a case of there being one physical space or one digital space. I think the complex multiplicities of why people engage or don't engage are the same in probably both spaces. It's not an easy or straightforward one. And I think the entertainment one, Malcolm, I don't know if that rings a bell with you, but it's a really fine balance, not just forcing yourself on people, but saying, it's okay for you to be like this. Look at me. I'm also laughing at myself. And it's, yeah, I don't know if that rings a bell or makes any sense. Malcolm, did you want to come in on that? Or, and I'll give James a couple of seconds to think about responding to Sucharita.
Am I on sound now?
Yep, go for it.
Yeah, I'm just saying, I mean, I've just been teaching online. I teach part-time 2 days a week with product and furniture students. And first of all, it was obviously necessity, we're just thrown into it. But one of the things I found, particularly with the stress for students, is actually listening and actually engaging with just general chit chat. Whenever I talk to them, I always have a general conversation about what's going on, what they're doing, and laugh about things. And we share funny things. I've been showing funny pictures of me when I was a student, and anything which is just, it gets engagement. And I also found I make sure they always have their cameras on. That's part of the culture we've created, so that we don't speak to faceless people. And actually, that's really important too. It took a little while to get going with that, but now all the students have accepted it, and they would never come in and have a chat in a group without actually showing themselves as well. You know, they can always blur the background, but actually I find actually seeing their faces is so important to teaching. And I just hate the idea of blankness, teaching into the void, which is actually something which I found was happening with the OU teaching. I'm actually retired from the OU now, but I'm just teaching, using my experience with the OU over the last 25 years has really helped me now teach my students who would have normally been in the studio. So it's been a really engaging and exciting year for me in a way that I never really expected. And I enjoy the fun. I like getting the students to be more creative in the way they communicate back. So they've all been learning video skills and really honing those to a way that it's actually blowing my mind when I see their presentation, and really exciting. And I think that excitement actually, in terms of the theatricality of the way they're presenting through video and other mediums, it actually make the whole online experience much more rewarding for everybody, for the students, for myself. And I feel probably more fulfilled in the last year than I have actually been slugging up on the train, going and teaching in the studio. And I just never expected that.
Yeah, and one thing actually, just sitting here when you said that, Malcolm, I'm wondering whether maybe for one feature session we should actually get some students in to actually talk about their experiences, because the other side of this is that there's a lot of very creative learning that has happened, not just a lot of creative teaching, and we forget that probably 50, 60, 70% of the effort is actually on that other side of the fence. Yeah, like you, I've seen absolutely incredible responses from students and supporting each other across the whole gamut. Sometimes it do put some teachers to shame, including myself, by the way. Yeah, cool. Sorry, James, did you want to come back on Sucharita's question? I think it was about I can't remember which one it was.
I think it was that word, more relaxed. Was that right, Sucharita? Yeah, I mean, I won't say much. I mean, lots of things about this year has been far from relaxing. I don't want to give the impression that it has been relaxing. I just meant there were certain, I guess, maybe ideas I carried, which I should have let go of earlier, around sequencing of things, about the need for people to be present, and really embracing the idea that people come to knowledge in very different ways. And I got a lot more relaxed about. It's taught me to be much more relaxed about this. That was the only areas of relaxation I can remember this year, though.
Well, again, it can be, and I wonder whether, to pick up on Keneilwe's point as well, it's that notion to get to that state of relaxation, you have to give up a bit of control, a bit of concern or worry about things, you know, that people are there or people are not there. And again, well, for us, the OU thing is it starts from that flip from teaching to learning. And as soon as that penny drops, you know, that you can leave students, or you can allow students the responsibility to do as much learning as you do teaching, that does give away your control, and it helps you relax a bit, and your relations are different then. It does change the space. It changes the care relationship as well, I think. I don't know if anybody noticed that. Lesley-Anne, sorry. Yeah.
So I had kind of philosophically embraced critical pedagogy before the pandemic. And I think that has kind of, I think that the pandemic has made a lot more people have to embrace this kind of critical pedagogy, where they're seeing that, okay, yes, the students have to have more control of their learning. And, you know, so like I kind of see the relaxation thing as part of this critical pedagogical kind of space. Or somebody put in the chat something about asking the students, I think it was Stella, something about checking with the students how they felt about what they had learned in the cycle before. And all of that is like generative teaching and learning, which maybe Paulo Freire was talking about. And so it's like we're all now in this space where we have to be using these kind of critical pedagogy approaches to survive. And I do a lot of co-teaching, and where the tension comes again is when I'm co-teaching with someone who's not into this kind of critical pedagogy or hasn't reached that space yet. And so, you know, I can relax with the students. And then in some of these classes where I'm co-teaching, I just that's where the friction and the tension comes, because the other professor wants to be the person on the box just giving the information. And I'm like, no, we have to kind of relax. We have to let things go. We have to give up the power, stuff like that. And so it's like, I would love to I'd like to get on my own box and tell everyone, okay, just give up. Just, relinquish the control and everyone will have a better time. So,
yeah. I'm just going to pull in Nazi's point there, because that notion of control versus maybe confidence. So again, maybe there's a difference between maybe controlling students as opposed to guiding them. So it's what not necessarily talking about is a completely contextless or a completely structureless sort of form of relaxation. It's the relaxation of confidence. It's like confidence in the design process. You've got no idea where it's going to go, but you know that if you adopt these bits and pieces, you do this, do that something will come out of it. So it's that kind of confidence about uncertainty. Maybe that's the balance, Naz. I don't know if that rings a bell. Or did you want to come in on that, Naz, at all?
Yes, thank you. That was indeed what I meant. Being able to foresee a few of the following steps. That does help in many ways, I think. There was something else I wanted to bring up, though, not to start a discussion, but just to share. Something that this is our third semester in distant education. And one thing that I have not been able to overcome or find a solution to is this loss of usage of gestures that we have in the studio, even if it's over an imaginary product, an imaginary design solution, not being able to make physical gestures that imply some sort of interaction with these products. I find it very difficult managing it through the computer, the laptop screen. And the other one is a loss of sense of scale, which I see particularly in the younger classes, in the younger years, first year, second year. They sometimes come up with these tiny models that they love showing from the camera. And I say, oh my God, this is an iron. Yes, we did ask you to make a study mock-up, but why don't you do it full scale? But teacher, it shows better on the camera. That's one of the problems that we face. Of course, we try to encourage, as they gain more experience, they start working on full-scale mock-ups, but that's another problem.
Really interesting, Naz. Do you think the two things are related, just really quickly? So basically,
gestures and scale.
Exactly. Yeah,
scale. Yes, it's very much related.
Yeah. Because
I want to jump in.
Yeah, go
just jump in. And so I had put in a chat earlier that I've actually started to have deaf participants in my classes. And I think it's because of the asynchronicity, it's because of captioning, and just this thing of, okay, we can have this interpreter who can easily come into class and we're just spotlighting the interpreter's video. But I had not an offline, still an online conversation offline with one of the participants who really talked about, I don't speak sign language, but he talked about the loss of scale, like you're talking about, Naz, and space in the communication, that you lose because now he's reading this language through Zoom. And so, I hadn't thought about that. So there are other people who are struggling with the scale issue that you just brought up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, or even just, I've seen it a few times in this session already. It's like that version of Zoom nodding that you do, that kind of really exaggerated up and down dog thing to make, you're overemphasizing that you are agreeing with people. And again, there are some spaces where that overlap does work, particularly with sign language, for example, like, applauding instead of like clapping. And there's some other gestures as well that work really well in an online space, but there's some that just don't make any sense, or it's very difficult to articulate the subtleties because it's not again, it's another one of these things about translating from physical to digital. It's not a case of ever translating. It's never a case of saying, take that thing and put it in there. The context matters. So unless you take the context with you into that new thing, it doesn't exist as a thing. You've got to recontextualize it and re-understand what the actual sort of meaning thing is behind it. That's the difficult bit, I think, that a lot of people have struggled with. That's interesting, though. That's yeah. So it's interesting that space has come up quite a few times, but a completely different like conceptualization of space. It's as if we've all kind of like learned stuff that we're not even able to describe yet over the last year. Okay, was there any other questions or bits that we wanted to come back to? Sorry, I haven't been keeping up with the chat, so my apologies. Please jump in if there's anything in the chat that anybody did want to pick up on. And I'll maybe just give it a couple more minutes before we sort of end the session. Oh, cool. Thanks, Leave. Matters of scale. And will that conference, Leave, do you think that conference will touch on issues, the sort of physical versus digital issues?
Perhaps not only in education, but the matter of scale. I think that's very important also in the digital, when everything is digital. But this came up, the theme came up before the corona, I think, because they announced it before the corona. But it's the Nordes who is, and I think it will be digital. So
okay. Cool.
I can also paste in the website.
Okay, cool. Well, I'll stick a link. As I say, I'll desperately try to do a blog post on this, try to capture some of these points, and yeah, because it has been a while since we've actually published anything in the distance education site. We're not entirely sure what to do with it either, whether it's maybe served a function, because it was more of an emergency response type of thing, and whether it maybe needs to do something different. And certainly today I'm picking up quite a lot of sort of different ideas or different scales of idea or different types of thinking that maybe need to happen over the next few sort of months. There's also a couple of things that we didn't maybe pick up on, which was quite interesting. One of the comments that stuck with me throughout the last year, it was one that you made, Lesley-Anne, way back at the start, when we were talking about how different, I guess, our schools were in terms of who we teach to. And it was your notion that, yeah, crisis, what crisis? You know, this is what we do. We teach. And again, our perspective is very much not the only perspective that exists. Sucharita talked about it very briefly in terms of not being online or having unreliable sort of connections. Again, we do a lot of work at the Open University to make sure that we don't just teach using online methods or dependency on higher technologies. I don't know if anybody's got any experience or wanted to maybe reflect back on that, but those kind of, are there any other lo-fi activities or things that people have been doing? Any other practice? I know, Lesley-Anne, you've got your example of the curriculum that was set up that you're kind of looking at just now in New Orleans, specifically a community co-constructed curriculum. I wonder if anybody had any other examples of that, though? Or Lesley-Anne, did you want to say anything? On that? No?
I don't know what I'll say that's so intelligent, but I'm just thinking, just to share what happened with the community, which is not like a lo-fi example, but, you know, we typically go into a community in a really kind of neo-colonial kind of way and say, well, this is the project that we want to focus on, you know, because we have a semester, it's such a short space of time. And during the pandemic, people from New Orleans community reached out and said, well, actually, this is what we want you to teach about this semester. And so like, that was an interesting flip in direction and I mean, I talk about co-design all the time, and it's awful that I had never thought about this, you know, like, oh, what do you want us to come and, you know, focus on? But I was happy that, you know, that we would be able to be responsive to that kind of request. And it really forced me then to think about how to bring people from New Orleans into the classroom during the pandemic when we were trying to be socially distanced and all that. So, you know, I became very creative with that. I guess the lo-fi thing is that we have to figure out how to teach some things via telephone. And actually, I think Sucharita and I had some conversations about that as well, about doing stuff via SMS and doing stuff via WhatsApp. So, you know, like our students had to do interviews because we're doing this community engaged work. The people that we wanted to interview weren't going to be able to do this via Zoom. And we had to figure out, okay, how are we going to do this via telephone, and how are the students are going to get the transcripts from the telephone interview, how they're going to record. And so it's not quite lo-fi, but yeah, you know, how do you engage with people who are not on Zoom when you're forced to be on Zoom? So that was an interesting experiment as well throughout the year.
Definitely. Did anybody else want to? Yeah, Pam, go for it, please.
I've been very quiet, sorry. I came in a bit late. We have all sorts of problems in South Africa, like load shedding twice a day, which electricity goes out for 2 to 3 hours at a time. We're just lucky to have an inverter, so you know, in my home, so I can continue. So yeah, our scale of issues is everybody else's as well as dealing with these kind of more problems that we have within our country. Also, a lot of students don't have access to data. Is very expensive. They don't have access to computers and that sort of thing. So it's been a massive challenge. But I know that's another sort of topic. But Leslie, what I'm really interested in is you talking about co-design, social impact design, because that really is my field of massive interest. And especially in South Africa, we've got really interesting communities. We've got so many problems that we kind of could solve by design, or that we want to research and, you know, and not solve, but, you know, attempt to write about. And one of my questions is, so in fact, it's a research I'm working on at the moment, but it is co-designing with communities that are vulnerable. And this speaks to what you're talking now. So we've got vulnerable communities such as older adults. And obviously looking at a whole demographic, it's working with 3 different groups. So it's like the group with no access whatsoever. And now trying to work with them in co-design through kind of online as such. And at the moment, it's kind of like, well, do I try and put them in a group? Are they prepared to? So there's all sorts of interesting dynamics to that. Obviously, before the pandemic, it seemed so simple. Now it's kind of to a different level. So I'd love to connect with you more over that.
Well, I will reach out, definitely. And that's actually where the stress came. You know, last semester it was like, how do we connect with people who are just so busy? You know, so students were doing an interview with one person while he was picking up his children, and it has to be via telephone, and he got upset, and, you know, and so the students also had to figure out how do they build the relationships in these kind of complicated phone calls. And right now we're working with seniors in New Orleans. And again, it was this whole thing, okay, we can't meet these people. But the seniors, it was good because they mostly still wanted the connection. So they were open to the phone call, but they just said, okay, you know what, we're not doing Zoom. And so we had to figure out those complicated things. And I know Derek wants to shut down the meeting, but one other thing that I wanted to bring in is again about the critical pedagogy. You know, the learning has to be situated according to critical pedagogues like Ira Shaw and Paulo Freire and, you know, Michael Apple. And so my content has changed. So actually my entire year has been about race and COVID, because that's the context, that's the environment that we're in. You know, I've taught like 2 design classes about race already, because we've had, you know, we've just been in this racially charged environment in the States. And then all of my public workshops, classes, everything has been about the pandemic, because that's an experience that everyone, I mean, people have different experiences, but that's what everyone relates to. So, you know, we're in crisis. And maybe that's the thing about, that's where I started last year, in this meeting, saying that we have to bring the crisis into the classroom. It's because it is happening, you know, it's not something that we could ignore. And I've been able to consciously focus on that and not have then the gatekeepers say, well, why are you bringing this into the classroom? That's where I've been.
That's an absolutely critical point. I mean, I suppose, I suppose we have, is benefited the right word? We've isolated ourselves. The studio is famous for actually being an isolated thing. If you look at like Latour's research on comparing the laboratory to the studio, we hide our work, we hide all our dirty sketches, all that stuff. We don't allow the client into the studio except to see the busyness or the fancy drawings. So there's a lot of facadism. And again, in studio practice, I've found sometimes we like to isolate ourselves from the rest of the world. And I know that a lot of studio practices are now trying to deliberately break that down, but it's not just a case of us then breaking down those barriers to the rest of the context within which we operate, but also the barriers that we force students to wear round about themselves when they come into the studio. And again, I know it's hugely challenging, but one of the things that you can do in a hybrid environment is actually help students own those kind of spaces. And that can be really difficult if you come from like a really like a certain background where you maybe do bring shame or you bring harm or a whole bunch of other risk. I know that's something that we get at the Open University. Our students come from lots of situations, and some of them can't be declared, some of them can't be shared. But if you allow them to bring them in some way that they can actually make use of them, if you like, in a studio setting, it's that notion of bringing the crisis into the studio, that it reconnects the studio in a different way. I know that can be really challenging because we're also in a disciplinary space as well, but yeah, maybe we're getting a little bit cough, yeah. Okay, was there anything else that anybody wanted to pick up on or offer as a final reflection? Man, my head is absolutely filled. There's definitely a lot of stuff, I know. Yeah, absolutely. And I got to about 3/4 of the way through and I was stopping writing. Yeah, so I'll try to capture some of this stuff because there really is some really nice stuff here. See how we go on with it. Okay, well, unless there's anything else, thank you all very much for that. Thanks for sharing your ideas and your perspectives, and thanks to everybody else who left it. I'll maybe try to edit the video into 2 bits to make it a bit easier for people to watch or make use of. So, as I say, the next event is the 16th of April. It's at 10 AM GMT, and it's Ricardo Sosa. And I'll tell him that he's got a really high bar to aim for after this session. So, thank you very much to everybody, and thank you for your contribution and for coming along.